Why did you get fired? A business I went to long ago was hiring, and I got the job. Right after I signed all the paperwork, the department manager comes in and asks who I am. I tell him I was just hired as a temp. Manager says he never authorized any hiring and fired both me and my boss on the spot. I did not work for this company at all, and they fired me. Story 2. I was denied a raise by H after consistently working 60 to 70 hours weeks, and my VP, who had supported and requested the raise for me, told me to stop putting in the extra time, work my 40, and spend that extra time applying to new jobs. Within a month, a meeting was called to mutually part ways because my work wasn't getting done. I was gratified to learn that they had to hire 2 people to do my job after I left. Sucks to see how much this resonates with people who have been in a similar situation. I left this job back in 2015, thankfully. The VP is no longer there either, and good for him. Story 3. For doing my job too quickly and sitting down the rest of the time. Gas station cashier, 3rd shift. Me. Why should I stand when I'm the only person in the store? Manager. It's more professional to stand than sit. Me. Then why do you sit in your office? Story 4. I went to the emergency room instead of work. Came back with an ER note and they said, "We won't be needing that. Can you come with us?" I was 18 and it was my first full-time job. Story 5. My manager kept losing my class schedule, worked at a Subway. I had class 2 days a week. Several times he put me on those days anyway. I gave him multiple copies every time. Owner took me off the schedule for calling out too much. When I showed the owner proof, he said it was too late and they already hired someone else. This was 12 years ago. I'm still mad. Story 6. This isn't why I got fired, but this is why I didn't get a job. I was 16 and looking to work at a Dairy Queen as my first job. My mom drove me to the interview and I was super nervous. She looked me in the eye and said, "Just be honest and be yourself and you'll do fine." I walked into that interview and when he asked me, "How long do you think you'll work here?" I responded, "Until something better comes along." Story 7. His wife thought he was having an affair with the office manager. He asked me if I thought it was possible that he was having an affair with the office manager. I said, "It's possible, but I don't think you are. I could see why your wife might think so too." I was 21 and naive as hell. Never should have said anything. Story 8. I talked my way into a job at a software company when they put a hiring notice in a local paper. I had no idea what the software did. I still don't. They hired me as a trainer and no one ever explained what the product was. I did a few weeks where I was trained on the software, but literally none of it ever made sense to me. It was like they were speaking gibberish. One day I showed up, a lady I'd never seen before gave me a check and walked me out to the parking lot. No one even ever said, "You're fired" or anything. It's one of the strangest things that ever happened to me. Story 9. I got fired once for putting in my 2-week notice. The only other time I've gotten fired was working for a trade company during the first week. I was a supervisor, and there was a second supervisor on site. I got a call that my wife had been rushed to the hospital, which was literally less than a mile away. I asked the other supervisor if I could go to attend to her, and he said, "Sure, no problem. I've got things here. Go." I returned to the job site later to find the boss there, and he let me go on the spot for leaving the team without a supervisor. He knew what had happened and still fired me. I won't lie, that one kind of pissed me off. Story 10. I refused to come in 15 to 20 minutes early unpaid for my shift. I was always 5 to 10 minutes early, but they decided they wanted me there earlier. I carried on as normal as, "I'm not coming in if I'm not being paid." Turned up for a 12 p.m. shift at 11:49. No one would look at me when I arrived. Then was thrown in a meeting and fired for being late. Was out the door before it even hit 12. It was the only time I've ever been fired. Story 11. My parole officer wanted to make sure I actually had a job, so he went to my employer listed on my file to surprise visit me on the job. I did home wiring, so I worked at different job sites and rarely in the office. He called me to say he was going to charge me with a violation for lying to him about my whereabouts. This could have landed me back in prison for my remaining 10.5-year sentence. The owner of the company had to speak with him and vouch for me. My parole office didn't charge me, but the owner sure did fire me that day. Finding a job with a felony isn't an easy thing, and it wasn't long before my PO threatened to charge me with a violation if I didn't find a job soon. Story 12. Came down with bronchitis on a Sunday. The doctor provided a doctor's note and told me to return the following Monday. They terminated me Friday. I didn't want to share too much of my business, but people are saying I'm spreading misinformation when that's not true. I did not qualify for FMLA. I was sick on a Sunday. Informed them Sunday. Called Monday with a doctor's note with orders stating I was to return no earlier than the following Monday. My manager told me, "Okay, feel better." Friday came around and I received an email stating I was terminated effective immediately due to absences. This was my first absence. I asked if I qualified for FMLA. No. I asked if I could resign instead because I loved what I did and who I worked with. No. You can be fired as an at-will employee at any time for anything. I didn't mention the illegal outcomes, as I assumed that was implied with common sense. Anyways, thanks for the input, y'all. Story 13. They sent me home because I sneezed and I was forced to get tested for COVID. Then when I tested negative, I was terminated for abusing pandemic policies to stay home. Story 14. I asked the CNA I was working with to stay with a confused patient while I went and put a new IV in another patient. The CNA left the patient alone. She fell out of bed and got a big wound on her arm. After I took care of that, I went and found the CNA and told her the patient was injured because of her insubordination. The CNA cussed at me and left the unit. I did not see her again that shift. She and another CNA decided on their own to trade assignments. I wrote the CNA up. The CNA went to MGMT and lied about me. She said I called her by a slur and yelled at her. I did neither. MGMT fired me rather than deal with a false claim. I collected unemployment. The CNA did something similar with another nurse a couple of weeks later and was fired. My Megger asked if I could be rehired. HR said no. When my MGAR quit to start her own nursing agency a year later, she hired me. Story 15. Because my job was eliminated. This was code for getting rid if you and hiring someone to replace you at half the salary. Their scheme was less than a stellar success because the person they hired was an idiot and could not do it. The customers got severely pissed. They gave me $15,000 severance if I promised not to sue them. I took their money and still sued them for age discrimination and won. Story 16. Stealing medics. I was a nurse. 6 years clean now. Lost my nursing license, though. It was a difficult lesson to learn, but it may have saved my life. Story 17. I was 19 and working as a janitor at a large self-storage facility where most days were filled with sweeping and mopping endless hallways of flickering fluorescent light. And when someone went delinquent on their bill, after a 3-month grace period, I would be instructed to empty their unit and dump everything in the trash outside. Once or twice, it was a person who died, but otherwise it was pretty common to see a room full of absolute junk that someone got tired of paying for. Get sex-up furniture, garbage bags of ratty clothing, stacks of old magazines. It was usually pretty hoarder-friendly stuff, and not that I'd want any of it, but the policy was I had to throw it into the dumpster outside, no matter what it was. One day, I get notified to empty out a unit, so I grab the bin, cut the lock, fling open the gate. The room is full of huge cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling. I open one up out of curiosity, and it's full of brand new unopened Gundam models. The entire room is full of them. Dozens of boxes with dozens of models in each. And I'm talking the $50 to $100 ones I saw for sale at my local comics shop every week. The manager would check up on me once or twice a day, and that morning he walked up and I showed him all of the brand new merchandise and said, "There has to be a better system than trashing all of this." He said, "Rules are rule." Something about insurance I didn't understand and told me to throw them all away. So I went and I backed up one of the complimentary U-Haul style box trucks, picked a few models out for myself, and loaded it up the truck with the rest of it. On my lunch break, I drove over to the Children's Resource Center that I'd volunteered at during high school. It's a place where any child, but usually poorer ones, would go after school for arts and crafts and activities to keep them busy until their parents got home. The people at the drop-off dock were so grateful. Before I even left, they were handing them out to some extremely excited kids. Drove back to the self-storage place with enough time to eat a sandwich and smoke a cigarette before clocking back in. But that's not why I got fired. I got fired because the manager came to check on me that afternoon and after a while of looking around, found me sitting cross-legged on the floor of the janitor closet with model parts spread all around me, happily assembling a sweet translucent Zaku model. I was so entranced I didn't even hear him come in. I just hear this long, drawn-out, exasperated sigh. I look up and he just says, "Keys," and that was that. I spent the rest of the week assembling Zekus and Valkyries and lying to my parents about getting replaced with a Roomba in Story 18 for getting lunch. I was 18, working at a mall kiosk with a manager title, even though I managed nothing for something like $8 per hour. Hours painted on the door, zero support or other employees to relieve for a break. The owner showed up while I had locked up to go get a bite to eat, fired on the spot. Story 19, worked in a DIY store. 10 minutes before my shift ended, I moved a pallet cage of paint cans slowly to the warehouse. And when I got in there, one of the sides came off along with half of the paint cans, which spilt all over. Anyway, there was about 2 minutes of my shift left, so I moved the pallet over the paint, covering it a bit, and went home. It was all caught on CCTV Story 20. I got fired for submitting my timesheets on Monday at 8 a.m. when I got into work. By policy, they were to be in by noon on Saturday, but my Fridays ended in the field, so I just did them on Monday morning. My bosses didn't even look at them until noon on Tuesday, so it had zero impact on them. I drove home from being fired feeling relieved because of how unhappy I was at that job. Story 21, I was jobless for 3 years, did lots of online work during that time. Finally got a job, forgot I got a job. Got a letter from my employer informing me that I got fired after a week. Story 22. I was a brand new engineer out of college, like green. I got a job offer at an aircraft factory, Cessna, a Textron company, as a quality engineer. I'd been an intern for 3 years and they helped put me through school. I worked in a projects group designing new floor layouts and how these business jets flowed through the process. I'd always received good performance reviews, and that is why my internship turned into a scholarship and into a job offer. When I started full-time, I was assigned to a facility across town that did sheet metal stuff. I remember walking into the office on my first day, introducing myself to my new manager. She immediately turned away, refused to shake my hand, and ignored me. The next 6 months were the same. She legit would not speak to me, would not give me projects, would not schedule one-on-ones to give any direction, and if I was on an email chain and she was looped in, she would take me off. I would walk over to her and she would hunch her back and try to cover whatever she was working on so I couldn't see, as if it was some big secret. Finally, I got involved in some continuous improvement projects. I was asked by our director to run with a few special projects, and I started, in my opinion, really finding a groove. Finally, she pulled me into a conference room, yelled at me for 2 hours, yes, 2 ducking hours, about how I was not doing the things she wanted me to do. She gave me a self-help book and told me I needed to read it and tell her what was wrong with myself, and she terminated me without HR or anybody else knowing. To this day, I never knew what her problem was or why she hated me from the moment I introduced myself. I have a wonderful and successful career and currently manage quality for 4 factories in a Swedish conglomerate. And if I ever see her again, I will tell her how I have modeled my management style, after promising myself I would never be like her. My employees always know what is expected of them, how they know if they are succeeding, where they can go for help if they are not at story 23. I built a snow scorpion sculpture. I used ketchup for the red glowing eyes and everything, on a particularly miserable day at a ski resort. The guests enjoyed my sculpture very much. Management weren't so happy. Story 24 was on the edge of a serious burnout and had a sick leave for 2 weeks. The day I returned, I got fired. This all after I had pretty much given my all for 1.5 years, working 10 to 14 hours every single day, working from home, and not having a private life at all. That's how I learned that you should never give too much at a job. It's just a job and that they won't thank you for anything at the end of the day. Story 25, 22 years ago. I technically got fired for harassment. However, the reality was, the big boss liked me and wanted to train and promote. The boss below him didn't like me. When he was away for a couple of weeks, I got called into the office and told I was fired for harassment with a certain member of staff. My direct boss was shocked. I was shocked. This other person worked in our department. I'd been around them for a couple of hours on my first day as they showed me the computer. Not really spoke since other than a hello on the way in. My direct boss apologized to me after the meeting, said she had no idea it was coming and had no idea what they were on about. There was only me and her in the office. The other 2 members of staff, including this guy, had their own office. We didn't have a need to go into each other's. It eventually came out he had been told to go along with it. Beach Boss was furious when he got back, but things had been done already. That person didn't progress any further in the company. It was awkward on so many levels. No big loss though, not for me. The person that arranged it all came off much worse. Story 26. My only time getting fired, I was 13 to 14 working at a go-kart track. I had been there about a month when I was left alone for a solid week to take care of the track as the other 2 track attendants sat around smoking, drinking, and chatting with the boss. I ran it flawlessly and had no issues. My first day off after working like 12 days straight, I got called in, I showed up within 5 minutes, and they fired me, saying that all I did was sit around and make the other guys run the track. They literally accused me of doing what the other guys were doing. I slammed that place so hard to everyone I knew, and they went out of business within the next 2 years. Story 27, I was fired from Panera as soon as I walked in the door for my first day of work. I showed up 10 minutes early and walked in 5 minutes before my shift started. The manager met me at the door and said I was being unprofessional and threatened to call the cops when I pushed for an explanation. Turns out the employees did lots of substances while working and were probably high out of their minds. Story 28, my boomer manager kept insulting me, blaming me for things my coworker did, and kept getting an attitude with me anytime I didn't bend over backwards to accommodate her ego. So one day she asked me why my coworker did a certain thing. I told her I had no idea. She pressed me. I said, how am I supposed to know? Explain it to me. Tell me how I am supposed to know what he did. She said, I don't know. So I walked away to keep doing my job. Next thing I heard was, you know what, just go. Get the duck out. I got unfired by her boss a few hours later and transferred to a better location, but being able to cold shoulder her after months of asking her nicely not to belittle me was quite satisfying. Story 29, I gave the fry guy an alcoholic beverage from the bar in a kid's cup. He used to hook me up with coconut shrimp and fiesta rolls. They fired both of us. I wonder how Jamar is doing nowadays. Story 30, I'm an electrician, and I was given my final warning for having an untidy van. It wasn't great, but I was told to tidy it over the weekend, which I did, and then still got my final warning and dismissal the following week. What really rubbed me up was that my boss was the biggest culprit for having an untidy van, and I had likely learned this trait as an apprentice from him. Honestly, though, looking back, I was probably sacked for other reasons, and have since been aware that rarely are you fired for the reason that your boss wants you fired for. When they want you out, they'll find a reason, so best to self-reflect on your other failings, than be pissed off for being fired over something trivial. Story 31. You know the person that's always stealing other people's stuff out of the shared refrigerator/kitchen space at work? Someone close to me got fired because they decided to do something about it, which would leave it up to the thief's choice in the end. They brought in a Ziploc bag full of dog treats. Think Beef Giddy looking one. They left them out in the open on the table with their name on the bag. Came back later, bag was empty. Jackass didn't even think to throw the bag out after they ate the dog treats. Months later, when my hero was supposed to be up for a big raisin bonus, they got called into HR. HR said they had heard that they willingly fed another human animal food. Word had gotten around from within because others were in on the whole plan, because Thief was stealing their food too. Thief was also stealing merchandise and personal belongings. You willingly fed another coworker animal food. Hero, allegedly. They didn't fire the thief either. He stopped showing up for work. Ita. To anyone that it really bothered that this was not about how I got fired, well, crap, my bad. It did happen to someone close to me, and I felt it needed to be told. If it wasn't clear, the person close to me did in fact get fired for this exact instance, I stated. Story 32. Long ago, I was a bill collector who didn't have the heart to prey on poor and unsophisticated people who had no money for food and rent, let alone paying for their vacuum cleaners and encyclopedias they got sucked into buying on years-long installment plans. I lasted a couple of weeks. The pay was good though, but not as good as the feeling of sleeping well at nights. Story 33. In college, I had a temp job doing quality assurance. I figured out their internal site had profile pages that freely allowed the execution of JavaScript in the form fields. I thought it would be funny to make my profile look crazy, change colors, added some animation. This way, when you went to the list of employee profiles, you might get a chuckle, and it would bring attention to the fact that it allowed executing code, something I already brought to their attention previously. Anyways, I got fired for breach of security. Story 34. I was in a really bad place when I took a job I knew I had almost no qualifications for. Maintenance repair guy at an apartment complex. I have no ducking idea how to fix anything. Lasted a few months before they caught on. Tried my best to learn and watched YouTube videos, but I was taking way too long to do crap. Story 35. Worked at a car dealership in college between semesters. Sold a Ford Raptor for like $80,000 and the commission was like $200. After that, I would go to my desk and just study for school. Didn't try to sell anything after that. Knew I would be fired. Took them 2 months to realize I had done absolutely nothing since the last time I sold the Raptor. $200 for selling an $80,000 truck. Story 36. Got fired for not only calling the health inspector, but posting pics of many food safety violations on FB, while tagging the restaurant in the post while on the clock in the restaurant. Story 37. I was in my late 20s and had just gotten out of the army and wanted to finish school. I worked for a pet store as a groomer part-time while I was working on finishing up the semester. I put in time off for my finals week about 3 months back, and it was approved by both him and the assistant manager. Everyone in the entire store knew I was going to be focusing on school for that week. Jackass calls me in the middle of one of my finals and left me a voicemail saying I needed to come in because they were one person short. I didn't even know until 45 minutes later when I walked out of class. He had called me 4 times, and on the 4th voicemail, he left me a threatening voicemail. So I called him back and we argued about my professionalism. So I went into the store to have a conversation with him, which led to him threatening to fight me. I told him if he wanted to fight, then he can take off his name tag and meet me in the parking lot off company property. Suddenly, he became really ducking docile and just told me I was fired. So I sent in the voicemails to corporate and found out a few weeks later he was transferred to a different store. Story 38. I gave my employee meal to my mother. That's literally it. I didn't like eating the food there, so I had my mom bring me lunch and I just gave my employee meal to her. Apparently, that was considered theft, so I was fired. Story 39. Got fired on day 89 of a 90-day temporary contract. The contract stated if you were still employed as a temp on day 90, they had to hire you in full time. They had a point system for discipline. If you were late, it was half a point. Accumulate 3 points and it is instant termination. At my firing meeting, they said I had accumulated 30 points. I explained for what seemed like the millionth time that the punch clock for temps is 15 minutes faster than the clock for hired-in employees, and that all their temps are getting paid an extra 15 minutes every single day. because they clock in and go sit in the cafeteria. I literally would walk in every day with my boss at the same time, and he was the one that fired me for accumulating 60 workdays worth of tardy points. And when I asked why I wasn't fired at 3 points, why was I allowed to accumulate 30, they said they liked the production numbers I was putting up. And they even encouraged me to reapply as a temp, and they could have me back on the floor as early as the next day. Story 40. Boss set me up to fail. I was hired by someone who knew I had no previous experience, but thought I had a great capacity to learn and liked my character. He and another senior manager took their time to teach me my role and answer any questions I had, and told me to always come find them if I felt unsure about something. Then they both left the company rather abruptly, and my new boss was the total opposite of them. He let me know right off the bat that had it been up to him, he would have hired someone with more experience. Despite that, he doubled my workload. When I tried coming to him with problems, he told me it wasn't his responsibility to answer questions and to ask my coworker instead. My coworker tried to help, but had his own massive workload to deal with. I lost my sense of direction and my work suffered for it. He fired me about a month after he took over. Story 41. I missed a lot of work because my wife got brain cancer. They called me in for a meeting and said, "Sorry, we are downsizing and letting a lot of people go." They didn't fire anyone else, including a coworker who was caught fabricating reports. Story 42. I took the vacation my manager approved my time off to take. I was working part-time and wanted to go to an event with some friends, some of whom also worked with the same company, one at my location and one another location across town. Knowing it may not be possible to get the time off when others had already requested it, I asked before booking or paying for anything. My manager said they would look into it and get back to me. I followed up a couple times and kept getting put off until I finally said I needed an answer. If it's not possible, that would be fine, but tickets would no longer be available soon, so any longer waiting for an answer, and it wouldn't matter if my time was approved. So my manager and I stood at the computer and reviewed the schedule for that week, and they confirmed they could make it work if I took the week off. I pay for my tickets, accommodations, etc. The week before it's time to go, the new schedule goes up, and I'm on it. I remind my manager we agreed that I could take the week off, and they told me it no longer worked out, so I needed to come to work. I said I had already spent more than I'd make that week on my plans, and I was going. My manager called me shortly after the start of my first schedule shift that week and asked if I was coming in. I told them I was 16 hours away at the event I planned to be at. I was fired that instant. It was somewhat satisfying to hear that he was later demoted. Story 43. I was a kid and just started at a local pizza place. I was let go a couple weeks later because a pizza chef from Chicago had moved into the area and needed a job, so it was a business decision that I totally understood. Week later, went to go get my last check and asked how he was doing. The girl up front was like, "Pizza chef from Chicago?" The only new hire was the manager's new G. Story 44. I was working tech support for a software company. We'd made a big sale to a major university, and I had been designated the lead contact point for them. First question they asked was, "How do we enable the firewall on your product?" "We don't have a firewall on our product." I talked around it a bit, but eventually they asked point blank, "Where is the firewall?" There isn't. Within an hour, I was in a conference room with a sales rep and the head of sales and my boss, the head of tech support. Lots of screaming went on from sales and then lots of meetings with bosses for the rest of the day. Throughout all this, none of them could deny the basic fact of what I stated. Our product didn't have a firewall, nor were there any plans to add one in future versions. Next morning, I came in and was greeted at the door by my boss, lead to a conference room, and informed that I was being let go for performance reasons. Later that day, the sales rep messaged me on LinkedIn telling me to enjoy waking up tomorrow morning and being a jobless bum. Story 45. Got fired 30 years ago for drinking too much tea while shrink wrapping Garner's pickled onions. Even though I was getting the job done, it was because it made other people complain that I had an easy job and I told them they were being ridiculous. Still, the best pickled onions though. Story 46. I made a cup of tea and the boss wanted to know why I waited 20 seconds for the kettle to boil instead of walking back to my workstation 2-minute each-way journey. Fired me. Started to go off on me about taking money out of the company's pocket and why everyone there was useless. I went off on him, spent 15 minutes full-blown screaming at him while the other director, his son, and HR sat there with a face on, called him told him all his employees hate him, smashed his mug and ducked off. I was going through a rough time and had literally zero ducking tolerance for some petty micromanaging. His son escorted me out because once I got near the door, it became all, "Yeah, you better walk off or I'll do something." So I full bore slammed the door and started to walk towards him. And his son was just like, "Leave it. It'll just make things worse." So he walked me off site. We had a smoke together. He agreed his old man was imagine he was much worse at home. Thanked him for his time and left. Just remember, if you're a crap boss and you try and bully people, you might be the straw that breaks the camel's back one day. He seemed shocked and I have no idea where it came from. I just exploded on the dude's story 47. I work full-time as a graphic designer, and my first full-time job was doing social media content for a startup company in my hometown. On a Friday, about 8 months into my job, my boss emailed us all to say that we'll be starting in the new office on Monday. I was never told that we were moving, but it seemed like everyone else was. I also didn't have a full driver's license yet, and the town the new office was in was an hour commute away, so I would have to take public transit every day. Luckily, I got some advice from my parents, and I told my boss that I couldn't feasibly commute to the office, but I still wanted to work for the company, so my boss terminated my position and I got put on unemployment. Story 48. The only time I was fired was when I worked as a regional auditor. I enjoyed the job, but a lot of my training didn't make sense to me, so I requested a different trainer. Sure enough, I was being deliberately trained wrong. At a company meeting, I called my trainer out. Everyone, and I mean everyone, sided with me. From that point on, I was harassed constantly about my performance by my trainer. I would be told specifically what to do, I'd follow it to a T, then get current debt for messing it up. Luckily, I saved emails / proof of my directions, and again, called my trainer out in front of the director for the department the next week. The big boss announced his retirement, and guess who took over his spot? My trainer. I was fired immediately. Turns out, when I was hired, I took over her old territory, which was where her family lived, half the country away. My trainer had been getting free flights home for years on the company dime, and when I was hired, that stopped. The only solace I have is knowing she died a few years ago from COVID. She was an anti-vaxxer. Good riddance. Story 49. I worked at a video game store that does trade-ins for cash or store credit. We not only do video games, consoles, and their accessories, but also media players or smartphones were also accepted. A lady in a wheelchair comes into the store. She was trying to sell her iPod. We required a state ID or driver's licenses to trade in items. She refused, but eventually gave me a card. It was a card for medical marijuana. I told her we don't accept that. Begins yelling at me that I was discriminating against her because she was disabled. Starts demanding phone numbers from my boss, but that wasn't enough. She wanted to go higher and demanded for the district manager's number. I was confident that upper management would have my side because I followed the procedure in trade-in. Even if I wanted to accept the medical card, it had no information for me to enter into the computer besides a name, making it impossible to complete the transaction. I even tried explaining this to the lady. I gave her the phone numbers and she went away. 2 days later, the store manager had my final check and explained to me that it was just easier to fire me than to handle a customer problem. That's how I learned that we are all expendable and replaceable, even if we follow the rules word by word. Story 50. Their official reason. I'm not happy doing my job. The actual reason. I wasn't happy doing other people's job on top of my own, and they didn't like that. I spoke up. Story 51. Because I descalated the manager when she was yelling at a girl in front of customers. Manager didn't much like that. I was stopping her from being a bully, so she fired me. This was years ago. The biggest twist is she had recruited a few of the staff to back her up in pretending I was bad at my job and possibly created fake write-ups. She refused to show them to me when I demanded to see them. Because news to me, I definitely didn't sign anything. So after I was fired, 2 days later, several of the staff, including some who had been on manager's side, came to my actual house to ask me for help. Turns out, once I was gone, there was no one to hold manager accountable, and she'd turned on everyone, screaming and writing people up when they couldn't be in literally 2 parts of the store at the same time, refused to do unsafe tasks, etc. I told them that they helped her get rid of me. Now they could deal with her. Story 52. I got fired all the time when I was working for my family company. I still had to show up the next day. For those who don't know, either working for family is either super easy or super tough. Usually the later. Story 53. Upwards of 10 years ago, I worked at a staffing firm and was trying to promote while being there 3 years. A new coworker also went up for the job and got it over me. I like this girl. I had worked with her a long time, but she just moved to my depth. Weeks go by, and I'm getting the feeling she doesn't know what she's doing. I'm the most tenured one on the team, so she relies heavily on me until she can't. She throws me under the bus for something she did, and the bosses believed her. I'm let go and file for unemployment. UE goes long as they are fighting me on everything, however. I learned to cover my ass a long time ago and had receipts of the blatant lies. I'm awarded even more on the company's UE insurance dime, roughly to $1,050 per week. My old boss is fired 2 weeks later, and the company tries to get me to come in to discuss and offer me her job. I politely declined as I was making more on UE than I was, and I don't have the stress or toxicity to go along with it. Looking back, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Story 54. I was an account manager for an IT sales company. We sold software, hardware, data center solutions to large corporations. My field rep and I had a great book of business, and we regularly at the top of the sales numbers every quarter in our region. Our leadership came to the decision that account managers should be pushing more low-margin commodity hardware, laptops, printers, cables, etc., and assigned a quota to each account manager. Well, my field rep and I had historically always put up big sales numbers on more advanced/strategic software and solution, and we simply couldn't beat out the pricing our clients had with Dell on hardware. This is in Texas, everybody used Dell, and the Dell reps wouldn't give us the price break to be competitive. So despite continuing to be the #1 sales duo in our region, I wasn't selling enough mice and cables, and after 3 months of not hitting this new separate quota, I was let go. I heard through my friends at the company that the initiative ended up backfiring immensely, as all of the account managers only started focusing on pushing hardware, and the big strategic deals started falling through since they weren't a priority. Insane thought process for a global company. Story 55, I have ADHD, and the nationwide shortage of ADHD meds caused me to not be able to take it every day. Job accused me of being high. After that, I left, should have stayed on until they fired me officially. Story 56. My coworker was refused for promotions, title changes, and pay rises for years in a 3-person department he pretty much ran. He was dealing with some serious depression for a few years, and unfortunately, he lost that fight. A week after, I had a meeting with my manager, department director, and AC level. They were recruiting 2 people to replace him. Job titles were the same ones he had been asking for years. I saw red and verbally ripped into them for about 20 minutes about how they always told him it wasn't possible, and now he's dead. It's suddenly possible? I was fired 2 days after the meeting and don't regret a thing. Those people are ducking evil. Story 57. Alcoholism that came about during the pandemic lockdown. I didn't get myself help in time. I am now taking care of elderly people and making almost half of what I was in the corporate world. Story 58. For being too good at a job. Did bar security, and this particular bar, saw it a bad thing that I caught fakes, refused to let minors in, and was willing to physically put myself into danger to protect staff and customers. They were looking for more of a seat filler so they can say they have the legal obligations to run a nightclub. Story 59. I got COVID. I was told it was because I was careless and should have worn a mask more often or gotten vaccinated. I did both. Ended up finding a new job with a significantly higher pay, better benefits, and better atmosphere. I still go back to this place to order coffee. The pain of giving them money is overpowered by watching the asshat who fired me have to serve me and treat me like every other customer. Story 60. I got fired for not being social enough. I worked for an insurance agency and was hired for personal, homeowner's car, and they sat me with the commercial business. There was a cubicle wall between me and my department. They didn't have walls and chatted all day long. They complained that I didn't interact with them socially. I got called into the office and was told I needed to socialize with my department. I told them that I was there to work and that due to my placement, I couldn't socialize without leaving my desk and standing at theirs. I did try to socialize with them, but I was in my early 20s, single and child-free, and they were in their 30s to 40s, married with kids, so we didn't have much in common. I attempted to stand at their desk to talk to them, but my phone would ring, or theirs, and I would actually have to work. So it didn't last long. BTW, I had a great relationship with the person that sat directly next to me, but she was in a different department, so I guess it didn't count. What did you get fired for? We were told we get OT for night work. The new company manager let it slip that we don't actually get OT for night work. So when I was scheduled for 5 nights in a row working on a transmission line cell site, I mentioned that I expect everyone working from our company on site get OT. Once it was said that we won't get OT and that it wasn't an actual policy, was written in an employee handbook, I forwarded the email chain to the entire company and leadership at Verizon. I was canned, but now everyone gets aught for night work. My life is better now anyway, and got my people what they deserve edit. Thank y'all for the support. Worth mentioning that it doesn't matter what our role is to make a difference for the folks around us. Even after the miserable events that followed this, suffering the reality I brought up on myself, it was very much worth it, even if only on a personal level. Don't hesitate to pull the trigger on some a-holes that get paid to ruin you, and be kind to the people who work with you. Story 2. The company's time clock software ran off of the computer's time, so when I was late, I would just close the software, change the time back to before shifts start, and then clock in and change it back. The supervisor who showed me the trick fired me after I told him to stop being a Karen and fire me. A day or two later, he saw me pulling in late, and when he went over the time info that day, it showed me clocked in on time. He knew why. Story 3. Aggressively squeezing breakfast muffins. I was a few days into working at MCD's, and someone complained I gave them a muffin that was too hard. They bake them at like 3 a.m. and sit in a warmer all day. This was before they had the full bakery menu. I think muffins was the only thing baked and maybe cookies. So my manager told me to squeeze them before I hand them out. Me being a dumb teenager squeezed the crap out of these muffins and got another complaint. They stopped scheduling me, haha. Story 4. Embezzled almost $500,000 from the doctor's office I worked at. Oh no, wait, that was my former supervisor who did that. 26 years after she fired me for taking home a leftover slice of pizza after a substances rep hosted a pizza party for the office staff. Karma can take a long time, but it always comes through. Story 5. The owner of our restaurant was smoking too much and thought we were all stealing. We showed up to work that day to find he had changed the locks and put a now hiring sign up in the door. Story 6. Worked at a gas station and was a sucker for the free soda. I would drink a few 24-ounce glasses of Dr. Pepper, don't judge, per shift, and had to piss relatively frequently. I usually worked with the same lady every shift, and every shift my drawer came up short, even like $10 to $20. One day my usual coworker was off, and I worked with another lady who warned me to watch my drawer around the other, and hers had been short when she was around. That got me to thinking. The next shift with the usual lady, I stuck some receipt paper into the lip of the bottom of my drawer and hit the bead. When I came back, the paper was on the floor. My drawer was short $20 at shift change, and my boss fired me. I told her of my findings and asked her to review the security tape. She told me to duck right off. The other lady had been there years. I left heartbroken and rented some VH tapes to indulge in and recover. One of the movies was Casino, and man, is that a good movie, come to find out. The usual lady was the boss lady's cousin, and they duck and told people I knew I got fired for stealing money. I thought about calling a lawyer, but also I was in high school and was delusional, I suppose. I got out of that town after high school and rarely returned, especially considering all my family moved off. Story 7. This one's the worst. I don't know why. I thought everything was fine. I was there over 5 years. Then one morning, they offered me a month's pay and go, or B, get a lawyer if I wanted to know why and take it from there. We didn't have money for a lawyer. Husband was still in college, so I walked away with a bit of cash. Bugs me to this day. Story 8. HVAC. Me and my buddy were assigned to a paper plant. He did installs. I did service/maintenance. Note, refrigerant is closely monitored by the EPA with savage repercussions for misusing it. So I would only use a couple pounds here, a couple there, just for topping off units. I meticulously recorded everything I used. My buddy was using 3 or 4 jugs at a time, 25 pounds a jug, because he was installing brand new units, and he never recorded what he used. Yikes. My bosses decided to fire me because I wasn't recording my refrigerant usage. I threw my pocket notebook on the desk. It's all right there. Everything I used. Their eyes bugged a little because they knew they got caught lying. The difference between the other guy and me? I wasn't related to anyone high up in the company, like my buddy. Truth be known, the company's going down and they're letting tons of people go. They made up lies to fire me. I don't hold it against my buddy. He didn't fire me. Story 9. I took 2 days off to put down and grieve my family dog who was 16 years old. I came back on Monday and they said they no longer trusted me, despite opening and closing the shop for 6 months. Story 10. I was fired after a month into my first job at a local pizza joint when I was 16. They called me during the Super Bowl and said I had to come in. I told them I was out of state without a car, so no way I could make it. They said I should have known this was one of the busiest days of the year and I should have stayed in the area. I came in to work my next shift and they just gave me my paycheck and said they had to let me go for not being a team player. 10 years later, I was fired from a job in tech because I refused to move out of state. This one hurt a lot more. Story 11. I got fired, but then luckily rehired thanks to my union because my manager confronted a shoplifter 4 times her size and the guy started to beat her. I, along with other co-workers, intervened, pinning him to the ground till cops arrived. The next day, store reps came in, told me I shouldn't have intervened and let me go. And story 12, went on a company business trip and accidentally found out my 2 immediate managers were having an affair. I didn't give 2 craps. Never said a word, but should have reported to HR as the global manager, male in affair, then did his best to get me fired, including making up lies about me stealing time, which I was able to prove was lies, thank you email and phone records, except for 1 hour of the stolen time. The female in affair tried to give me warnings and let me know I needed to get help. I went on early maternity leave, and both of them were fired within 2 weeks because of this. Came back from maternity leave to a very hostile work environment. Despite the affair, and the firings having nothing to do with me. Was back for a month and they ended up firing me as it wasn't working out, despite stellar reviews from those I worked with and my clients. Story 13. I worked at Sears. I just walked in for my shift and the store manager asked why the department was a mess. How the duck should I know? I just walked in. Yep, well that led to an exchange of words on the sales floor. I probably shouldn't have said damn you. Just a little backstory. The store manager was a lesbian, as am I, and she automatically thought that meant we were buddies. Still, to this day, I flip her off when I see her driving. Damn you, Lisa. Story 14. 1970s, yet close to the edge tour. I had my tickets and had the request approved for time off. They changed their mind at the last minute and would not let me off. Left anyways and was genuinely surprised when I got back on Monday and they informed me that I was fired. Story 15. I worked for Hobby Lobby as a manager in my mid-20s. I was fired when they found out I was gay. They said it didn't fit with their family value. Reason number 974,356 to hate Hobby Lobby. Story 16. Refusing a delivery order. I used to work at a place that made special fruit arrangements. It was a part-time job that was supposed to last until I started school. It was a chill environment to work in. The lead there was thorough and helped make sure things were built properly and ready for delivery while getting things prepared for tomorrow. I started there working opening shifts, and no matter how early I showed up, he was already working. I was originally hired before their busy holiday weeks and impressed enough that they wanted me to work at a new store. They were opening up in a neighboring city. Start there a few weeks later, and everyone else they hired went through the ropes to learn how things were prepped and built. After a couple of weeks, we finally met the lead they hired, whom had worked for them previously. He was an okay guy to work with, but after a couple of months, he was tardy/late to work in the mornings before the store opened. Excuses were numerous. Car issues, kid issues, had to take his wife to work, anything and everything. He'd finally arrive and help us for about 20 to 30 mins before going off and doing some project for the rest of the day. Summer rolls around, and they hired a girl they really liked. She did a lot of closing shifts during the week, and they wanted her to open on the weekends. So I offered to switch places with her because I was usually an opener, along with the lead. It went well as things were usually more relaxed and not as busy. Plus got to work with some of the cute girls. So when I started working closing shifts, I'd bring in my dinner and eat it in the small break room we had, and then clock in at my start time. By this time, the lead and I had developed a cold relationship. I had told our manager before that if he was in a position of responsibility that he should be punctual about his work. It prompted a discussion from the owners about if I was a team player or not. I told them if I wasn't, I wouldn't have offered to switch shifts so the other girl would get opening experience. I arrived one day for my scheduled shift, and the lead asked if I wanted to do a delivery that came in just under the delivery deadline. I said no because I wasn't scheduled to start for 20 minutes or so, and the owners had previously gotten on us about clocking in early. It wasn't out of the ordinary for an order to come in at 4:45 or 4:50, and it be a same-day delivery, barely meeting the 5 p.m. delivery deadline. The lead was going to be leaving around the same time I logged in, so I asked if he could deliver it on his way home. He had one of the other workers scheduled deliver it. It got to my start time, and I clocked in and got to work for tomorrow's orders. About 30 to 45 minutes later, the manager came in, and she had a sad look on her face, and she said the owners were letting me go because I refused a delivery. Told her what happened, but it wasn't going to do any good. Took my Keurig from the break room and went home. All worked out in the end because I got the career I'm in now, started a month later, and that new store only lasted a year or so before they closed it due to lack of business. Around the special holidays, I always recommend their competitors, duck them owners. Side note, that store was limited in space, so we had to get creative about our storage. The lead, though, it was smart to store things in the bathroom. I walked in one day and looked up to see our napkins in their box sitting on a shelf with the top cut off. Napkins exposed to the crap spray and all that other nasty stuff that'll fly around when the toilet gets flushed. Grossest thing ever. Story 17. Long story short, I worked in a nursing home for rich people for 2 months. This old man is a perv and has grabby hands. He molests pretty much all the young orderlies when they do his morning hygiene. A girl was crying because he grabbed her ass and tried to get her boobs. He also used insults when she left. This was not the first occurrence, but I was new and it was the first time I heard about it. The orderly's supervisor wanted to force the girl to go back to this man's room, and she refused. They were fighting about it. I was the nurse in charge at the moment, so I told them to send one of the guys instead. I got told basically that the resident was rich, so he could do whatever. I was appalled and furious. I wrote an email to the manager telling her about this abuse and how it was unacceptable, that his behavior was normalized by the supervisors, how we should be protecting our staff and provide a safe environment to work in. Say is say. Got fired the next day somehow. Story 18. Buckle up. This is a wild ride. So I worked in the health sector at a major trauma children's hospital. It was my dream job, and I worked directly with an entire medical team, answering to a head of department as my boss. I knew all the staff from the volunteers to the head of ear, and they knew me. It was the most wonderful place. It was a 2-step journey to losing my dream job, neither of which were in my control. Step 1. My then husband and I had found out when I was younger that I had fertility issues. When I finally fell pregnant, everyone was overjoyed for me. Everything was perfect until I went into sudden premature labor at 23 weeks gestation. There was nothing that could be done, and my child was born and passed away in my arms 7 minutes after birth. A part of my soul left me that day. I took a leave of absence for the day I gave birth, and 2, not a typo, days after. Then I returned to work full-time. This got me an official warning from the head of department for not attending my shift. Yes, this person was well aware what had happened. The entire hospital was bringing me condolence gifts, flowers, food to take home, but not that jackass. Instead, I got officially written up, first and final warning, for lack of productivity and commitment during the 3 shifts I'd missed. Step 2, the icing on the cake. Fast forward from losing my child about 5 months. I went home on a Friday night feeling a bit unwell. My next scheduled shift wasn't till the Monday. Around midnight, 1 a.m. Saturday, so just into the start of my break, I woke up vomiting mucus uncontrollably. I was rushed to hospital where an x-ray showed I had double pneumonia, both lungs white out on x-ray. I was rushed into ICU where I spent 7 days fighting for my life. Family called to come say their goodbyes. I was as sick as I could be. For those medically minded, my fever was 109F/42.7C. My pulse was 240. I wasn't expected to make it. I just confirmed I'd fallen pregnant again about 3 days prior, and to give me the best chance at survival, they had no choice but to seek the consent of my family to terminate. I spent a total of 12 days in hospital. I had no memory of ICU, and my poor mother had to tell me I had lost my second pregnancy. After being discharged, I took a further 2 days at home to recover. I returned to work just 14 days from leaving that Friday night, 12 of which I was in hospital. I'd lost a shocking 44 pounds or 20 kilograms in those 12 days in hospital. To say I looked like I'd been to hell and back was an understatement. Upon my return, I was let go by the head of department, lead doctor in the hospital, for my unreliability and my blatant disregard of my previous formal warning to not skip my shifts. 2 things happened after I lost that job. I got a lawyer, and I never went back to working in the health sector. It shattered my faith in humanity and the notion that there was compassion in medicine. It also wasted all of the hard work and training and study I'd undertaken to get to my dream job. And all the bills. So many bills. A final note. Duck presenteeism. It's not worth it, folks. Story 19. Ah, yes, my first summer job during high school. Got my manager's daughter arrested for assaulting a customer. She didn't work there, but slapping a woman in a wheelchair for taking up too much space was not something I could let slide. Story 20. Fired once from a night auditor position at a hotel because the swing shift lady decided she wanted my job. After 4 months of working straight, owners refused to hire another person that wasn't family. I finally was able to take 2 days off. When I woke up the first day, there was a message on my answering machine saying that I was fired because the audit was completely screwed up and the swing shifter had to spend 4 hours fixing it. I was OCD about the audit, so I knew it was B's. I asked them to check the audit sheets to see if my initials were on the back bottom corner. They said no, so I knew right then I was set up and told them so. Doesn't matter though, still fired. Found out 6 months later that the swing shifter not only got my position, but was fired for stealing almost 10 grand from them. Karma, people. Karma. Story 21. Got ridiculously drunk at an industry conference out of town in Boston. Ended up sleeping with the wife of a senior level exec who worked for a vendor of ours. That was on Thur night of a 3-night stay. Friday night, the exec found out and confronted me in front of my boss. Let go almost on the spot. We were walking to the elevators when he said it was a really good idea if I found a new place to work. Room was paid for through Sunday, so I stayed in Boston, just kept away from the hotel bar and conference center, bar hopped and took in a Boston college football game. Sat night, exec's wife shows up at my room very late, very drunk. We ducked again. Took me 5 months and a change in industry to find a comparable gig and shed that experience. This was about 15 years ago. Nothing similar has happened since. Story 22. I worked in AP for several months and had the ability to issue payments. There were some payments that weren't accepted by the client, and I was tasked with researching why. I discovered the problems and sent it over to the team responsible for updating contact and payment information. Segregation of duties required that I couldn't change where the money went because I was the one effectively writing the check. The team responsible did nothing with me sending weekly emails asking for updates. I went to my manager and the manager above her with documentation requesting the changes. After 4 months, they were asking me for a timeline when the outstanding payments would be taken care of, and I told them that I needed them to tell to the other team to get the payment information fixed or nothing could move forward. I was told that it would be addressed. Fast forward a month, nothing was fixed. I was asked again for an update. I told them I was beyond frustrated with the situation because nothing was getting done, and that I had no faith that my managers would actually do their job and that I was tired of the incompetence. Let's just say that they didn't like that story 23. New operator forgot a piece of his equipment when he left. I had to make a run out to where he was with what he needed. Foreman told me to drive home the point he needed to check his equipment before he left the yard. I did. 2 weeks later, they fired the foreman and introduced the new guy. Of course, it was the operator I chewed out for not checking his equipment. Want to guess who the first person he fired was? Story 24. After months of being told I was useless and too slow to do the jobs, I had a massive panic attack and my mom made me call in sick. I got fired. Best thing to ever happen. Story 25. I worked at a gas bar for my first job and the new manager had it out for me because I wouldn't put up with her bullcrap. She was in way over her head and put into a managerial position due to nepotism. Wrote me up over very, very minor things that other employees wouldn't even get a talking to over. Accused me of stealing from the till because my float was out a few dollars. Accused me of giving discounts to friends and family and tried to blame me for over-ordering that week's fuel delivery and causing an overflow of gas in the lot, even though that was like the sole thing the manager was responsible for doing. I was told my next write-up would result in my termination, and after realizing the company and our union didn't have my back at all, despite me being the longest tenured employee at the time and several of my co-workers coming to my defense, I decided to hand in my uniform without notice the day before she was supposed to leave for a week-long climbing trip and left without saying a word. One of my co-workers said she was furious at me because we were so short-staffed that she had to cancel her trip to cover my scheduled shifts, so that made me feel a lot better. If you're reading this, Jody, I hope for your current employee's sake that you're not such a huge to work under anymore. Story 26. New coup comes, fires me for difference of opinions. New coup leaves after 3 months. I'm rehired for a superior role. A year and a half later, I'm fired for difference of opinions about management style with my direct manager and new coup. 4 months later, the coup switched roles to another department, and my ex-direct manager is on the way out. Here's me waiting to get rehired and then fired for the third time from the same company. Story 27. I worked at a McDonald's for 3 months, and the manager, male mid-40s, was constantly giving me the dumbest jobs every time I worked there. While I was just supposed to be the person handing food out the window, he had me scrubbing crap stains out the toilet, made me detail the bathroom every time I was there. He wanted it spotless and, to his standards, had me scrubbing counters that didn't need it, while there were no customers and the rest of the staff was in the back. I didn't get a single day of training. I was just kind of the cleaning boy. I used to walk to this job from school. I was doing a test after school because I missed a day and ended up being 2 minutes late and wore shoes with a hint of green. Dress code is full black. I apologized for being late for the first time in my 3 months working there. Told my manager I was sorry about it and tried to explain it's a McDonald's and nobody will actually notice the kid mopping the bathroom shoes. He didn't say anything and just walked to his office in the back. I worked my full 5-hour shift. Legally, that's as much as I could work. I go to clock out, and while I'm doing that, he tells me not to show up again because I won't be out on the schedule. I just said, okay, I'll be here for my check Sunday. He replied, don't bother. I arrived Sunday and told him I want my check. He refused. I walked in the car and did a pussy move and told my dad. He walks in and was out in about 5 minutes with the check. I'm not sure what happened inside. I just assume he got all scared because he saw a parent of a child. He's been an idiot too for the past 3 months. Story 28, depression. It was full-time at an auto parts store. I had to stop going to school because the depression was too much. I would try to go to work, but was often late or would call in. The regional manager told my store manager I had to be let go because I wasn't reliable. He wasn't wrong. My boss was crying as he did it. He knew I needed help and wanted to be the last thing I could hold on to. I ended up getting help and doing much better. That was about 16 to 17 years ago. I still have moments that kick my ass, but I can work around it better. Also super rare. Story 29. Worked as a QA tester for an online game company. Found bug while on my personal account at home. Came in the next day and reported the bug. Was very clear. I found the bug while playing at home on my personal account. It was a nasty bug that let you duplicate very expensive items. A few weeks later, someone in customer service was checking the logs for people exploiting the bug. They found mine and the company decided to fire me on my birthday. That was around 15 years ago, but it still upsets me every year on my birthday. Story 30, going to see my family after my grandmother died. I found out on a smoke break via phone call. I went inside and brought the mail to my supervisor, choking back tears, and she urged me to go. I didn't want to leave work, but she said it would be okay. I got fired a week later for leaving in the middle of my shift with no notice and using my phone during business hours, according to the owner of the business. If you ever want to know where not to buy Harley-Davidson motorcycles and apparel in SC, I'm your girl. Story 31. I worked for a small English language school with 2 teachers. The other teacher said something very worrying and slightly predatory, and I told our supervisor. The supervisor got angry at me because the students liked the other teacher, and a month later, when it came time to extend my contract, I was told I would not be rehired. The other teacher received a €100 bonus. Story 32. Because a 45-year-old male, me 60-year-old male who I rarely had interaction with, came to my computer after I had left work for the day and looked at my desktop picture and felt he was harassed. My lead, my immediate supervisor who only interacted with me when they had a difficult customer or a hard technical situation that needed an expert. He would come to me and have me call them to resolve the situation. Since he was relatively new, it only happened about 5 times. I never had any conversations with him beyond that. This is from a restaurant in a Best Western hotel in Grand Junction, Utah, on one of the roads leading from the Grand Canyon. I had left on Friday after my shift. I came in on Monday, and they had me come to the training room where the department supervisor and the lead were there, along with an HR person on their very first day. They fired me for harassment of this 45-year-old male with no investigation or a chance for me to defend myself. In 50 years, the only time I've ever been fired. Story 33, I wanted a keyboard tray. Someone decided I needed to talk to an ergonomics person. So the woman comes and wants to see me work as a computer programmer. So I sat down and typed Waitley, looking at my monitor. I should say that this company didn't even have cubicles. They had long desks at which everyone sat, then a 4-foot wall, then another line of desks, so other people sat facing you. There was a large room full of double rows of desks like this. So if a conversation with any volume gets started, 20 people can hear it. This woman starts berating me like I'm 5 years old and being naughty. I don't sit right, I don't type right, my keyboard is wrong, etc., etc., on and on. I finally tried to derail things before I got any angrier and asked her if we could deal with this the next morning. As I had a software release, I needed to get out by the end of that day, which was true. Was fired the next morning. No reason given, none is needed or advisable in my state. Found out the woman was a friend of management, had held several different kinds of jobs over the years, and likely had little if any training in ergonomics. Certainly had no skills in helping people. Also found out that she had a history of being difficult and of getting people fired when they angered her. Story 34. I had a delivery job for a cable company. My manager told corporate that we were only allowed to do the route, plus getting gas and breaks and then back to the hub. However, if we had a short route that day, we had side work or online learning we could do. I got fired for doing the side work and not sitting at the hub in my van until it was time to go home. I have emails and texts from my manager asking me to do the side work, doing property surveys. I have digital proof that I had done over 12,000 in the 5 years I'd worked there. I also have quarterly reviews praising me for doing them. The union stepped in. The company refuses to give me my job back or pay back wages. Now I'm waiting for a third-party arbitration to take place. I was let go in 2022, and to make things crappier, I applied for another job at that company in March 2022. I got the job on June 2022 and moved 100 miles away on my own dime. I got an apartment, paid the security and electric deposit, moved a lot of my stuff while continuing to pay for a mortgage back home. Then they fired me for the first position BC. My manager was lying a hole. Had to break the lease on the apartment, move back home, again on my own dime. Story 35. I lost my over $100,000 per year salary because I ever so slightly pushed back against an abusive customer. By pushed back, I asked several times for him to stop insulting me, that I'm not stupid and I do know more about than him. I'm a ducking SME on the matter. I produce most of the ducking webinars for the past almost 2 years. I do know what I am talking about. Yell and scream at me all you want about our software not working the way you want. Have at it. Start verbally attacking me. I'm going to try and tell you in the most professional way possible to knock it off, and this call is over. I was let go for lack of professionalism because I allowed the customer to get that worked up during a phone call. The colleague that took over my whole customer cried on the first call because he was such an idiot to her. She asked management to take the customer over. They told her no, and she quit 3 weeks after I was let go. Management fired the customer 2 weeks after she quit. The same customer who on our first call, 3 weeks before I was let go, asked me who I voted for in the last election. And when I declined to answer him, he called me a liberal pussy. Management would not let me fire the customer. Story 36 was 22 meters in my first job out of college, working for a tyrannical CEO at his software startup, where his underlings knew no better as no one had worked anywhere else. Workplace relationships very frowned upon, unless you get married to someone there, in which case you'll stay forever. Started crushing on the 22F in the cube next to me, and one Sunday we went to brunch, but there was a wait and no chairs to sit on while waiting. So I sit on the curb and she sits on my knees for 5 minutes during that time. The 25F right hand, Karen of the CEO, sees us, gasps audibly, and then walks off. Next day at work, tons of closed-door meetings. Everyone looking at me weird. Shocker. I was fired at the end of the day, where I was told, it's just not working out. I guess they decided my crush was the better worker, so I would be sacrificed for her to be more focused. She quit the next day. We were both unemployed for 4 months, but found great healthy jobs to really kickstart our careers, started dating, and have been happily married for 10 years. The company asked each of us to come back multiple times. Story 37. Not fired, but almost fired for eating all the chocolate inventory. Apparently, I was caught on camera opening the boxes in the back and snacking on the food multiple times. Whoopsie story 38, worked at a children's theater, ended up dating a coworker. We kept completely professional at work, but would see each other after hours. A parent saw us holding hands or something small and complained that we were setting a bad example for the kids. Story 39, Godaddy wasn't showing the profits that they wanted in 2023. End of first quarter, they fired 8%, what was written in the email by the CEO, of staff and recorded record profits. I survived. A few months later, they fired maybe another 2% based off department's numbers. I got hit along with some friends. We were all in the company rewards program for going above and beyond and exceeding expectations and all that. What makes this annoying is my department had seen a 300% increase in our workload in the last 6 months. Instead of keeping valuable employees, they put record profits as the priority. The entire year of 2022, several departments had made a case to raise base pay with HR. After a review that took 10 months, they said that we were paid fairly. So while getting fired and severance was nice, it showed me that working for large companies sucks. I had worked for Bluehost years before and had them shut down our office location, top selling and best performing with support. They built and moved to a new location in Arizona. Support small businesses wherever possible. Look for places that prioritize people over profits. Story 40. Boss held a check of mine that he owed from an underpayment and had me driving 2 hours to and from the job site every day for almost a year before I started filling my gas tank with company fuel every morning before we went to site. Multiple people knew I was doing it, including several of my superiors, and all of them were cool with it, as the owner was crafty about paying people what they rightfully work for, or even getting their checks right or on time. He called me one day and asked me how much fuel I had been taking, and I told him I wasn't sure, as I had been doing it a while now. Got fired at the end of the week when I wrapped up the job, so that kind of shows you what kind of person he was and what kind of worker I was, as he wouldn't let me go until I had finished the job I was running, because it would have tanked, and he would have lost over 6 figures over it. Pay your people, people. They are what keeps your ship afloat, especially when they've beaten themselves to crap to make you millions of dollars. Story 41. I was fired from Lowe's for calling in sick after my 6th shift. Some stomach bug had been going around the store. I caught it and got pretty sick. Called in and was told if I was willing to call in before 2 weeks that I wasn't Lowe's material. Turns out I wasn't, and made a pretty good life for myself without Lowe's. Story 42. My boss harassed my subordinates. He got himself in the company in a legal suit by one of the girls. Only a few people knew about it. All of a sudden, I start getting offers for another branch, a promotion and better pay. I initially refused because we didn't have my replacement ready. They gave a week to prepare someone. The day I show up at the other branch, they say they didn't know I was coming and there's no position available. I returned to my branch and they refused to let me work there again since I turned in my 2 weeks. When I protest and say, fine, let me finish my 2 weeks at least, my boss suspends me and sends me home. I later found out that same week there was an investigation due to the lawsuit and that they had fired everyone who knew details about what was going on. I moved away a couple of months later, so I never followed that up. I hope he got what he deserved. Story 43. I submitted a full written proposal for the company to consider production bonuses as a way to incentivize productivity in our ops staff. For context, I have my MBA, and business writing is one of my strengths. They tested it out and it worked. We saw immediate month-over-month improvements of 30 to 50% in closed volume revenues. They got nervous about staff-level employees talking so openly about the comp plan and triggering legal protections. They also didn't want the newbie, me, to have leverage to negotiate promotion or raises so early. Director-level peeps wanted to claim the glory and money for themselves. I got placed on a PIP that wasn't based on performance metrics, requested in an email with my director, who was the one pushing me out, and VP of HR that they format the expectations list as SMART goals to stall them firing me until I could find another job. Got new job and decided to not make a big legal mess of it all. Probably should have. Story 44. Took too many leaves, as I was preparing for master's degree and I couldn't disclose it to my boss, so I took holidays for random reasons. Basically was trying to settle my finances for fees. I got fired. Then after a month, I got admission to master's degree. Pursue a degree for next year. Landed in better paying job after. Story 45. Not me, but one of my coworkers came in drunk and hungover and proceeded to have a 2-hour nap in the lunchroom, and then was shocked to find out he was getting fired. Story 46. A witness in a will prove-up didn't show up for the Zoom hearing, despite me sending multiple reminders of the hearing date time that we scheduled around her availability. A will prove-up happens when some dies, they have a will, but something about the way the will was signed or notarized was done improperly. This means the court has to go through a few extra steps to authenticate it. When I called the witness to find out what was going on, she said, "Oh, was that today?" But then when my supervising attorney spoke to her, she said, "I never told her," despite me having proof of multiple reminders. Then her excuse was that she didn't know how to use Zoom, to which my employer's response was that I should have taken the time to teach her, which I would have done if someone told me to. So I was terminated, and I was so freaking happy. And story 47, I was the night manager at a hotel at the beginning of COVID. Our hotel shut down, but they needed to have at least one person on for every shift because of some tax or zoning law. They fired me, then kept the breakfast cook and moved her to overnights because she made $2 an hour less than me. 3 weeks later, they asked me to come back because she couldn't take it. Story 48, working in a supermarket in the early 1980s, NYC. I was fairly off the chain as a kid and would do random dumb crap. I had a thing for the A-Team as a kid and would imitate Mr. T as I went about my shift stocking shelves. The hammer finally dropped when I boisterously proclaimed, "I pity the fool who has to build the gefilte fish end cap." Big props to Saul, he held out as long as he could. Story 49. One of my first jobs, I got fired because a coworker was stealing and they thought I was helping her. It was cashier at a fast food place. We had a safe under the counter to get change from. The safe was directly below my register. Owner always put girls at register closest to door, guys under the one with a safe. Well, the girl that usually worked opposite me would go to get quarters and pocket the $10 instead of putting it in the safe. Owner decided I had to be helping her since it was happening right in front of me. Truth is, I had no idea she was doing it. Story 50, getting a second job. Before beginning this job, I was working 2 jobs, 7 days a week, and making decent money. After almost falling asleep at the wheel, I was looking for a job that would allow me to win the same amount with less hours. I'd been promised I'd be making $300 in just tips at a very well-known restaurant in my island, getting paid $3 an hour, and had been assured by the staff it was true. After months of "it's just low season," I realized my mistake and began searching for another job. After applying and receiving a job offer from the company that promised me $9.50 an hour, I advised the restaurant that I'd be working 2 jobs on a set date, and the next day, the manager fired me. He stated, I just wasn't reaching their expectations. What's the worst way someone you've seen get fired? We had a rash of thefts within the office. Everyone kind of suspected it was one employee who was known to steal people's lunches, but it had escalated to personal electronics going missing. One day, he's bragging about his brand new iPod and shows it to another coworker. Coworker flips it over. On the back, it's engraved with the name of another coworker. He was gone by noon. Stealing from people you work with makes you the worst kind of scum. Story 2. I was a finance director at a car dealership. We had 3 new sales reps start that week. On Saturdays, we'd order lunch from a local restaurant and send one of the new staff to pick it up. The rep we sent gets a speeding ticket and reckless driving, 20 miles per hour over the limit. Does a couple shots of tequila at the restaurant, waiting on the food, then ordered surf and turf, filet mignon and lobster tail, for themselves, when told it was to be a salad or sandwich menu item. The idiot put the tequila shots on the tab that was emailed to the dealership. Story 3. I had to let someone go once, for a lot of reasons, but tardiness was a big factor. Not a 5 minutes late guy, like 4 hours late, and acted like nothing happened. The day of his firing came. He was late. The damn guy was late to being fired. Story 4. My first job ever was for Baskin-Robbins when I was 15. I went in for my first day of training, excited to finally be making pocket money. The owner made me try to memorize the ice cream flavors in the first 30 seconds of being there. When I was unable to recite them perfectly in their order, he did this big hand motion and screamed, "Training over!" I laugh now, but man, that was crushing for a nervous teenager. Story 5. Not fired, but quit. And it wasn't the worst. It was just incredibly weird. Guy was really strange. Anytime he was asked questions about how long it would take to complete something in meetings, he would simply get up and walk out. He took ages for even the really simple stuff, and he was essentially a short time away from being put on a plan and booted. Thankfully, he put in his notice, but it was the day of his leaving that was remarkably weird. My boss went over to walk him out at lunch, collect his ID, etc., and the guy runs away. He ducked down and hid in the middle of the cube maze. My boss walked around looking for him and was about to call security when the guy popped up from around a corner and did the tickle thing on my boss's tummy, laughing. For everyone who saw it, no one knew what to do. It was surreal. He stood up laughing, handed in his badge, and walked out. 3 months later, another employer called asking for a reference. We didn't give one. Story 6. I didn't see it, but somehow the 19-year-old forklift driver who was in charge of the Temp warehouse ran into center support with such force it bent and totaled the forklift. He ran off without telling anyone. I had to call the boss and explain what had happened. He turned up the next day like nothing had happened and didn't understand why he was fired. Story 7. When I worked at a supermarket years ago, a new guy started at 6 in the morning with me. He looked really hungover. He was working with me, and he kept disappearing for 20 minutes every now and again. It was a big supermarket, so I just figured he was getting his bearings. He took lunch at 11:30, came back at 2, pissed as a fart. Started smashing up the freezer section and trying to fight every man he saw. Police were called, he was arrested, never saw him again. Story 8. I was working in it for a company and would receive termination lists from HR so that we could remove the employees from our system. Went on vacation with my wife, came home, turned my BlackBerry back on, and got a term list from HR with my name on it. A very WTF moment. Story 9. I worked at a daily newspaper through college. I was a junior reporter covering wrecks, murders, police raids, and the ilk. A newsroom at the time was the Wild West with all kinds of dysfunctional personalities, broken marriages, and substance abuse issues. One of those people was the paper's religion editor. This guy was an unfortunate case. He had been born with an entire spate of birth defects, which combined to give him this goblin-like appearance. He couldn't drive and had this weird, shambling stride. They didn't hire him. He just showed up one day and started working. They felt sorry for him and eventually gave him a desk and a paycheck. If he were interviewing people, he'd have to get a taxi to see them. And when he finished with the religion page for the week, they'd put him on the copy desk or some such. To give you a feel for this guy's status, he was about 50, and they'd trust me to handle stories over this guy. Like I said, it's a sad case. Leonard had 2 issues. One was his slapdash way of cleaning himself after going to the bathroom. This explains why his desk was always by the end of the aisle, by the restroom, and away from everyone else. So second was his adult film addiction. He would stop by the adult bookstore downtown before heading into work, shoving his new purchases into his big valise. Meanwhile, the editor was this fire-breathing redhead of a guy. Think of every stereotype of what a daily paper editor would have been like, and that's your guy. He personally liked me because I was a young, ambitious whelp who didn't cause too much trouble, but he ruled that newsroom with a rod of iron. One day, I was finishing up a story at my desk when the editor marched down the aisle toward Leonard's desk. He was obviously in a pissed-off mood, meaning everybody got out of his way. He gets to Leonard's corner and starts to rip the guy a new one because he'd made a mistake on a story on food at the local community center. After chewing Leonard out, the editor asks, "And why do you smell like crap all the time?" Then he kicks poor Leonard's valise. The case opens and some of the most egregious dirty you can name comes spilling out. Leonard is shuffling around in his awkward way, trying to scoop up the offending material and stuff it all back into his bag, while the editor is berating him about A, his crappy reporting, B, the aromatic cloud of poo that surrounded him at all times, and C, the adult film that he brought into the newsroom. Fired him right then and there. It was crazy to witness. Story 10. Names censored or changed because this company already ruined my life once. If you work in this industry, you probably already know this company, but whatever. On to the story. Bob had worked for Media, a multinational media corporation with an office in NYC, since it was, or data systems, and had survived the company's big layoffs that had happened after, merged with their major competitor Media, where they let go roughly a third of the company. On a random Tuesday morning, he walked by the front desk where I was having a conversation with the receptionist about some such thing or the other, when he told us it looked like rain and asked me if I could get my hands on one of the company's umbrellas for him so he wouldn't get soaked on his way home. I went to the back and grabbed a bunch from the back warehouse full of random company branded crap and brought them out front to make sure there were some for more than just Bob, and went back to finishing up my conversation with the receptionist. Then, Bob walked by us with 2 security in tow. They just fired me. Take care of yourselves. It turns out Bob was part of a 3-person team in the US that was half of a team, the other half being in the UK, where the team's boss, head of the department, also was. Well, it turns out that guy messed up bad and was accidentally giving the same work to both teams. What I mean by this is, Team A wakes up, does the day's work, and then Team B would wake up and redundantly do the same work. This had happened a few times apparently, so the department head came up with a reasonable solution. Fire the America team and just hire 3 people in the UK. Bob had been with the company for 34 years, along with his coworker who has been there for 7, and another remote worker who has been there for some time in between, but I can't remember the exact number. 14-ish, I believe. I watched a really nice guy who did nothing wrong get escorted out of the company he dedicated 34 years of his life to because of the mistakes his boss made. They didn't even let him pick up his desk. I got to mail that crap home to him, or at least to the address we have on file for him. They would later fire me at the very start of the COVID pandemic, in April of 2020, and then several months later fired another third of the company before buying out and merging with another competitor. They have since offered stock to workers in light of a potential IPO on the horizon, and then fired. You guessed it, another third of the company. I have fun stories, like the guy who punched his boss for passing him up for a promotion during a meeting with investing clients, but no firing will ever be as bad as what they did to my bud, Bob. Story 11. This kid I went to high school with got fired at his first job post-college on his first day of work for trying to steal company data. Last I checked, he got involved with the Fire Festival guy and made a cameo in the documentary Story 12. I used to work for a privately held company. It was one of those places where, if you liked it and did well, you could work there until retirement. It was an up or out sort of place. Anyway, there was a VP there. We'll call him Rex. Rex was super intelligent and great at his job, but had absolutely zero social skills, especially when it came to reading other people. He also had no social graces, and generally people were very put off by his rudeness and bluntness. I have no doubt he was on the autism spectrum. However, he had an incredible analytical mind. And because this was a company that was mostly data-driven, he was an asset. However, because he had zero social skills and zero savoir-faire, he was a liability when it came to holding on to staff. Eventually, the company was able to work things so that he had very few direct reports, and the ones he did have were able to deal with him as needed. And things rolled along merrily for a long time. Well, the company owner, Jack, kind of a socially awkward guy himself, decided to step down, and his heir apparent, Jim, took over the company, with Jack only checking in every couple of months. Well, the result of this was that Rex and Jim had to work together regularly, as Rex pretty much ran one of the 3 divisions of this company. Usually, Rex only dealt with Jack and his couple of direct reports. Well, Rex and Jim got along like oil and water. And it was compounded by the fact that Rex either didn't realize or didn't care that Jim, being the CEO, had the final say in any matter, even if Rex didn't agree. This led to arguments, many arguments. It also led to far too much of Jim's day being taken up by Rex's antics. One Friday, about 2 months later, my boss called me into the office and simply said, "Listen, sweet, Rex's last day was today. There are going to be some changes in reporting in the wake of his departure," and went on to explain the new company structure. Well, found out through the G-Vine that Rex just pushed Jim too far one day. They were arguing about some business-related item. Jim made his decision, and Rex continued to argue. Jim, already at the end of his rope, just fired Rex on the spot. Rex thought Jim was kidding. He was absolutely not kidding. I never saw Rex again after that day. I heard he was unemployed for 4 years after that day. While his resume was strong, his social awkwardness kept him from interviewing well, and our industry is somewhat insular. So his reputation preceded him, and not in a good way, for many employers. He finally got a job in an indirectly related industry at a significant pay cut. He lasted 7 months there before being fired. Last I heard, he was consulting, whatever that means. Story 13. I had a coworker who got suddenly fired. We didn't know the reason. And days after, her furious parents went to the company building to complain to the management about the sudden termination of their daughter, claiming that the termination is unjust and that she is diligent and reports to work every day, like how a parent complains to the principal's office. Turns out, this coworker only come inside the office to clock in for work and go out again to be with the boys, smoking and whatever they were doing. Coming inside the office again to clock out without doing any tasks. Story 14. Heard this one from a friend who once worked for a company who did a landmark MMORPG and verified it with some other former associates. So landmark MMO isn't making money as well as it should, and there is talk about job cuts amongst those in the trenches. Lo and behold, there's a call one day to meet in the quad for all personnel. Uh-oh. People file out, gather, and wait. Murmurs are abound with people as nothing happens for 10 minutes, until suddenly, head of company comes up to the crowd. He pauses. People's voices die down, takes a big breath, and, "We got funding all. Everything is fine." Whoops and cheers. Audible gasps of relaxation. The head is grinning as people applaud, and he soaks it up. In fact, we are bringing in pizzas to the left of the building to celebrate. Everyone needs to follow me shortly, but wait. We need a few people to come over here. Congrats all, and keep up the good work. Yay, clap, clap, clap. Head hands off to faceless drone, who calls out about 20 people and asks them to follow him to the right of the building. To the left of the building was the pizza party. To the right of the building, those called out found all their crap thrown into boxes with an envelope sitting on top of it, and a lot of guards pointing them to the parking lot. All fired. No exit interview, no saying goodbye to friends, not even the ability to ask for references. Yeah, they used a duck-in pizza party and funding to cut the wheat from the chaff. Glad my friend left. That entire company was absolute dog crap by the end. And from what I hear, more than a few are just as bad today. Story 15. I worked in an office that had different parts of the business spread out over a couple different floors. They announced layoffs on another floor, and mentioned this guy I worked with in their announcement. People that were on that floor came down to console my coworker about losing his job and were like, "We're really sad to see you go." And he had no idea what they were talking about. They'd announced it upstairs to the whole floor before even talking to him. Story 16. I don't know if it counts as fired per se, but one of my drivers was flying to his home state and decided to punch a flight attendant in the face less than 2 weeks after 9/11. Never was seen or heard from again. Story 17. Someone get escorted by security for almost blowing a multi-million-dollar contract with a major tech company. I can't go into details about the project, as I'm still under my NDA, but I was part of a major project for a major tech company. We were all excited to be part of this project, along with adding this company to our resumes and enjoying the perks we've all heard about. Well, the company I was with was almost lost that job due to one person's almost fatal error. Internally, we had some secret internal documents that went into graphic detail about the operation, and if leaked, it could cost the client about $50 to $100 million. To them, it was nada. To us, it was the world. And this was our foot into the door to other huge tech clients. So one of the hiring managers wanted to give this 19-year-old kid a shot. He was smart, but he was still at that age where Snapchat was popular. Keep that app in mind, as it's critical to the story. One thing he was highly intelligent, and we all figured he can do the grunt work. Well, we were wrong. One day, we hear stories about a certain picture making its way online. We panic. It showed highly detailed critical internal information that only internal employees knew about. This immediately went to internal security, and they found the person that did it. He took a photo of internal software and internal documents and posted it on Snapchat. Why? To show his friends and the world, to humble brag. Once internal security found out who it was a day investigation to find out who it was. Internal security came to his desk and asked him that he was free to leave. His badge and laptop was confiscated as he tried to argue his case that it wasn't him, etc., but camera footage showed him pulling out his phone, taking a picture of it, and posting it on his Snapchat story and showing his friend. He left with his head down, tears coming down his face, and he was saying that he really needed this job and he didn't want to go back to working at Subway, etc. He was banned from all projects working with not just that certain company, but also pretty much banned from working in tech at that certain area of the country. Story 18. This firing was relatively normal, but the aftermath was horrible. My wife worked for a construction company, and when one of her coworkers was out on vacation, my wife was doing an audit of one of their jobs. She ran across some fishy invoices, so she called the company that allegedly sent them. The company denied sending them, and my wife dug a bit further. Turns out her coworker, who was on vacation, was forging invoices and embezzling from the company. My wife kept digging, and by the time the coworker came back from vacation, they had found about $20,000 that she had stolen. The coworker was fired shortly after she got back from vacation and left the company without incident. The next day, the company's owner's ex-wife, who was still friends with the coworker, called the company saying she couldn't get in touch with coworker and was worried. Calls were made to the coworker, her adult daughter who lived with her, neighbors, and finally, police. After some official stalling, police let the company owner know that the coworker had called 911 and while on the phone with them, killed her daughter, their dog, and herself. The company called in a forensic accountant, and they determined the coworker had, over the course of about 5 years, stolen nearly $500,000. This all happened a couple of years ago, and my wife is still dealing with the guilt and grief. She feels guilty because while she was doing her job, if she had just let things be, none of the things that ultimately happened would have happened. She's grieving because her coworker was her friend. She's in therapy, doesn't work at that company or in that industry anymore, and we've moved to an entirely different city. That incident isn't the sole reason, but it's one of main ones. Story 19. Guy was high on something. He hit a steel beam with his forklift. The forklift was impaled on the beam and the bolts attaching it to the ground flew off. The metallic rattle was heard and felt on the entire warehouse. Managers and supervisors ran to him to check on him. He was surprisingly unhurt. When asked what happened, he started cursing and blaming the beam for being placed in the incorrect spot. That specific section of the warehouse was completely empty, and the beam was painted radioactive yellow in order for forklift drivers to not miss it. Guy had a habit of speeding up unnecessarily. Guy tested positive during a last-minute substances test. He had already been reported before for using substances in the parking lot and for having a nasty attitude. He was fired that same day. Story 20. Worked for Ashley Furniture for a few years in their warehouse. We were having issues keeping forklift drivers because they'd be regularly substances tested and have to be let go for failing all the time. Eventually, manager who oversaw them convinced leadership higher up to stop with the substances test on the grounds that the drivers don't show up high. This was like the best ducking deal imaginable for them because straight up told, we don't care what you do at home. your friend's house, your girl's place, your grandma's place, but you don't do it before coming in and you don't do it here. So they're all like, duck, yeah. And it's great for a while until we start having an issue in my area where we receive trucks that were out for delivery for the day. Every few days we're smelling substances on the wind as it blows into the doors, and we're like, no ducking way someone is being that stupid. And we call the manager over to go check it out every time he misses the dude. And we assume it's some dude who's smoking before driving home, because there's no way they'd miss that if he was going back inside. Anyway, after several failed attempts at getting said manager over, finally one day, he's in a meeting with some pretty higher-ups, and we radio over to him. Hey, we smell it again. And he's like, bet I'm on my way right now. Bails out of the meeting, grabs a golf cart to cross the warehouse as fast as possible, and literally jumps out the bay doors and sprints into the parking lot to find the guy smoking and fired his ass on the spot. It was far enough away that we couldn't hear it word for word, but we got the idea of what was being said. Basically, like he put his neck out on the line to make that deal, and that he betrayed the trust not only the manager put in, but for his coworkers too, and that if he couldn't wait to get home, then he had no place there. He came back in a few minutes later, and we were expecting some crap-eating grin for having finally caught the dude, but more, he was pissed for having to do that and having to explain to his bosses what happened. Story 21. Not really a crazy story, but harsh and unnecessary. We had a girl that was struggling a couple of weeks into the job. She had to commute 1 hour, 15 minutes each way. They let her drive in, fired her at 9 a.m., so no pay for the day, and 3 hours on the road for something that could have been a phone call or done at 5 p.m. the day before. Story 22. Not really fired, but we had an intern show up 40 minutes late on his first day. Then the cops showed up 15 minutes later saying they had been chasing him for the past hour. He was taken away in cuffs. Story 23. In the middle of getting fired, they quit. And it was sort of the, you can't fire me, I quit thing. So he was an installation tech for a fixed wireless internet service provider. The job entails taking a work pickup truck to a location and installing a microwave antenna on the building and running some Ethernet cabling and then handing the customer a RJ45 handoff to their router. The tough part, confining LOS line of sight to a local tower, as we live in an area, Norcell, with heavy tree growth. The installers are told that the work trucks are equipped with a GPS system, Wi-Fi, and cameras. Basically, we hit a web portal, and we can see where they are, where they've been, and a shot inside the cab and what the driver is seeing through the windshield. So this guy on the job about 4 months is just sick and tired of doing the installer's job. He gets a job to install at a location, reveal later because it's worth it. The location is due south from our HQ about 10 miles. His boss was already a little sus about him because of some other stuff and decided to watch him in real time. He drives 10 miles north and spends 30 minutes doing slow, lazy loops in a Walmart parking lot. Then comes back and says, yeah, the place was closed. No one was there to allow me up on the roof. It was a 7-Eleven. He was installing internet at a 7-Eleven. When confronted with the info from the vehicle tracking app, he just upped and said, you're questioning my integrity? I quit, and stormed out. The hilarious part is like 2 weeks later, he answered the ad for his replacement with, I'd really love to work with you guys again. He did it several times. Can I get a second chance? He was in Aish or being out processed a day or two later and asked what the appeal process was. Dude, we have like 10 employees. There was no appeal process. Story 24. I was working as a dispatcher for an ambulance company. A crew arrives back to base, comes into my office and talks to me. I notice a smell of gasoline. I comment that I smell gasoline. He states, oh, that must be me. I spilled some gas on my hands refueling. I say, oh, okay, go wash your hands. He says he will. But his work partner gives me a strange look and they leave. A few days later, I got called into my supervisor's office. They sat me down and started asking me questions about this interaction. After a bit, I asked what was going on because the questions I was being did not add up. They told me that when he was refueling before returning to base, he had driven away with the fuel pump still in the tank, ripping it off and causing massive damage to the pump, spilling hundreds of gallons of gas because he didn't pull the emergency stop. He had just gotten out and removed the pump from the tank and went back to base. He told his supervisor that he reported the incident to me and that I told him he was good. Dispatchers and ambulance crews have completely different supervisors, and we report incidents to completely different people. He would only report anything to me if he could not get a hold of either the EMT or paramedic supervisors. And all I would do is send a message off to them to contact that crew due to some type of incident. I calmly tell them what happened, and they tell me they figured something more like that happened. I had been at the company for 3 years and was one of their best dispatchers. Needless to say, he got fired, and the cleanup costs for this mistake were close to $100,000 due to the environmental damage he did. No clue what happened to his partner. Never did see him again, though. Story 25, 2 different times. Same company, 1. The guy hired was a friend of a manager. The new employee was creepy AF, hitting on women and making crude comments. This lasted a week. Then the following Monday, everyone had a manila folder on their desk. Inside of it was his criminal record, substances, forgery, and abuse. Gone by the end of the day. 2. I will never forget this day. A new company bought us. The day of the acquisition. HR shows up with 3 police officers. Out of 300 people, 250 were turning in their laptops. I am the it guy at the time. After they are riffed, they are told to bring their laptop to me. They walked down to me at my cubicle and said, "Hi, I'm to give this to you?" I nod and say yes. About 5 people actually handed it to me. Then the 6th guy yells, "Hey, here's my ducking laptop," and throws it down the row to the cubicle across from me. Then the next guy did it. Then the sales guys would walk down and say, "It's nothing against you, man," and throw it hard into the cubicle. It was like venting for them. It got to the point that the computers were just a big, massive pile across from me. I called my boss and told him what was going on. He could even hear a laptop being thrown in the cubicle across. He told me to go home. The next day, I was the only one in the office. The manager was let go after he cleaned house. Everyone else that survived worked from home. I know what you want to ask. What about the cops? They were only there to make sure the employees didn't attack anyone else. They didn't care about the laptops. BTW. This was my first job after leaving the military. My first corporate experience. Story 26. This one is mind-blowing. Managed the corporate HQ cafeteria for a major financial services firm. On the floor during lunch one day, and a staff member who worked the deli sandwich station motioned me over. "Watch that woman in the green dress. I've seen her do this the last couple of days." Sure enough, she goes around our massive salad bar filling a bowl. Then she grabs a soup cup and fills it from the bowl of the hand-shredded chicken breast we prepared fresh each morning, leaves the cup on the counter, walks over and pays for her salad at the register, then goes back into the serving area to grab a few packs of saltines. And the cup of chicken she stashed before walking out. Not cool. Turns out she was some department VP. I had to ID the cup they pulled from her office trash can. Bye-bye job and escorted out by security. Good riddance. Story 27. Worked HVAC as a contracts engineer. The MD kept hiring contracts managers with better experience than me on more money, company car, etc. And they were all terrible. And I was doing theirs jobs again pretty quickly. The worst one was really special though. Rang in sick on his first day. Pretty bad luck, we thought. Surely you want to start on the right note, make a good impression in a new job. In the 1 month he was there, he worked maybe 10 days total. Sickness, car troubles, bogus but hard to prove, stopping him getting in, at least one family funeral to attend. Arranged site surveys for whole days out of the office, only for the clients to advise he never showed, etc. The MD finally has enough, calls him in, tells him he's gone straight away, probationary period. Takes back the company phone, laptop, car keys, gives him 10 pounds and asks me to drop him at the train station, which I reluctantly do. About an hour later, I answer the phone, and it's fired guy's wife asking for him. I sheepishly explain he's on his way home, doesn't work for the company anymore, and I really shouldn't say anything else. She presses me and I tell her he's been sacked because of poor attendance, lying about appointments, etc. She says how he's been at work every day for the last month. He's even done some weekends, hasn't he? I put her through to my boss after that. Not the worst sacking, I suppose, but the guy managed to lose his job and blow his marriage apart in one morning. We never did find out what he'd been up to on those days. He told his wife he was working, though. Story 28. Back in my days in video game development, I was working at a startup on an early PS2 game. After dangling promises of profit sharing to motivate us through all the crunch time, near the very end of production, they unceremoniously fired everyone who was on schedule, including myself. Only the people who were behind schedule got to keep their jobs, at least for another few weeks, until they finally caught up. And then every employee was fired, leaving only the owners of the company. The funny part was that I happened to be in the bathroom when they called everyone from that first group into the conference room to fire them, so I missed it. I just returned from the bathroom to find everyone upset and packing up their belongings. So I was on the crap can while I was supposed to be getting crap canned with everyone else. The game flopped anyway, so karma caught up with them at least. I went on to have a very successful career, while the owners of that company struggled for many years to come. The best work they could get happened to be handling the Nintendo ports of multiple hit games that I went on to work on and answering to me. Story 29. I was working at a seafood processing plant as a vice line lead. Basically all of the responsibilities without the raise. I was doing lifting and undercutting, where you lift fish out of the thaw tote and cut the stomach and cut off the back fin. I admit I'm not a fast worker and I started falling behind, so I asked the temp next to me to help me catch up, since he was standing there doing absolutely nothing since I was too slow to keep up. He laughed in my face and said, "You ain't my boss. I don't have to do crap you say." It was annoying, but I brushed it off and continued, until he loudly started talking crap about how bored he was because he had nothing to do because of how slow I was. I told him to go upstairs and get his stuff because I was the acting line lead and he no longer worked for us as of that moment. He again laughed in my face and started making fun of me for thinking I'm his boss. When the next break came up, I went and talked to the boss, and he got called into her office, where she told him he is the line lead and has full authority to fire temps. Since you continued to keep working after being fired, you won't be paid, as that constitutes volunteer work. He stormed pit of there, punching holes in the wall and destroying anything he could get his hands on, which all came out of his paycheck. I think in the end, he only got maybe $15 working there 2 weeks. Story 30, not way to get fired, more like the fallout from it. Everyone on the team of 6 to 8 people was told to go hang out in the conference room. Boss would be in momentarily. She drops in, explains that Mr. Smith is being let go, and due to circumstances, we're not supposed to engage with him, and that our security will be escorting him out. In the coming days, if he reaches out to you, politely but firmly, tell him you aren't to have contact with him. Sorry, I can't really get more into it. Turns out he may have said a few things in the process of being fired that completely crossed the line, that basically ended with, you can leave with the box and security, or you can leave in the back of a police cruiser. What's it going to be? So 10 minutes or so pass by, and we think it's done, and we're allowed to go back to our desks. I hit up the men's room, and oops, there he is. Obviously, the man has been crying and getting himself together, and he just starts word vomiting. Like, man, my wife, she left me, and now this. I can't believe this. I gave some non-committal sorry and politely excused myself and had to find any stragglers of the team to clear out and find management to see WTF the mix-up was, since we thought he was already gone. It's never fun to watch another person have a full-blown breakdown, even worse when you've been told by Har to avoid interaction with him. Story 31. I'm in it and hadn't been at this job long. There were rumors that our project was going to lose funding, but nothing was confirmed. I was working in the data center and went back to my desk. My coworker, who sat across the aisle from me, said something like, "That was a crazy meeting, wasn't it?" I wasn't aware of any meeting, so I asked. He said, "The one we just had where they announced they were laying off all those people." I hadn't gotten any kind of invite to said meeting. It dawned on both of us what was happening. After an hour of freaking out, I got the call.